Have you ever just looked around at the world and had the feeling that none of it makes any sense? You're scrolling on your phone, and one second you're seeing news about a genuine global crisis, and the very next second it's some bizarre new meme that everyone is talking about. It all feels so chaotic, so full of contradictions. It feels, well, upside down. Our politics feels like this giant shouting match where nobody seems to be speaking the same language. Our culture, it seems to just churn out an endless stream of new anxieties, right alongside an endless stream of entertainment to distract us from them. And even our own desires, right? They often lead us in circles. We chase after things that, once we actually get them, don't really satisfy us. It's this deep, nagging feeling of being off-kilter, like reality isn't quite lining up the way it's supposed to. Well, what if I told you there was a kind of master key? Not a simple answer, not a magic bullet, but a tool. A tool for understanding the strange logic that's humming away just beneath the surface of all our lives. Today, we're going to dig into a really powerful, and let's be honest, provocative idea from the philosopher Slavoj Žižek that promises to do exactly that. And this feeling that the world is completely bonkers? It's not new. Not at all. The philosopher Hegel, way back over 200 years ago, he had a name for it, die verkehrte Welt, which translates to the topsy-turvy world. He saw that social reality has this weird tendency to flip on itself, to produce the absolute opposite of whatever it claims to want. It's that bizarre logic where our best intentions just backfire in the most spectacular ways. A revolution that starts with a dream of freedom ends in absolute terror. A piece of technology that's meant to connect all of us leaves us feeling more alone than ever. A grand plan for creating universal wealth somehow ends up creating even deeper, more painful poverty. The world seems to be running on this inverted instruction manual, where taking the most rational path often leads you to a completely irrational place. But here's the kicker. This isn't just random chaos. Hegel, and later on Žižek, they argue that there's a kind of hidden logic to this madness. There's a reason things keep turning into their opposites. And that's the puzzle that Žižek is obsessed with solving. He wants to find the engine that's driving this whole topsy-turvy machine. So here's our roadmap for today. First, we're going to really get our arms around this whole idea of a topsy-turvy world. Then, and this is the big one, we're going to uncover that master key, a concept called surplus enjoyment. After that, we'll use this key to try and decode politics and capitalism, see how it gets inside our own heads and messes with our desires. And then finally, we'll get to Žižek's really shocking proposal for a possible way out of it all. All right, let's jump in.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning, the problem itself. Our reality, day in and day out, feels like a parade of contradictions. We're just constantly hit with events, with behaviors that just seem to defy any kind of simple, rational explanation. It's a world where 1 + 1 doesn't always equal 2. Things just don't add up the way we feel they should. And I think it's important to really sit with this feeling for a moment, because you can't find the answer until you really, truly understand the question. Identifying the problem is the first step to finding that key that might unlock it.
These are the kind of glitches in the matrix that Žižek just loves because they reveal the hidden code running underneath everything. Let's really break these down. First, think about that porn actor. It's a wild example. He needs to look at a screen, at a fantasy, to perform a physical act with another real person who is right there in the room with him. Reality itself, the actual physical moment, is somehow not enough. It needs this detour through the digital world to make the real thing work. That says something profound about how we relate to the world now. Then there's the big stuff, the global catastrophes. We know about climate change. We know about pandemics. These are existential threats to our very survival. And yet, for most of us, most of the time, they just become a kind of background hum, a low-grade anxiety we live with. We might feel a bit guilty, maybe recycle a bit more, but the sheer size of the problem just paralyzes us, and the catastrophe becomes just noise. And what about politics? Nations are constantly shouting about their sovereignty, their right to control their own destiny, their own borders. But at the same time, they're facing problems like pandemics or financial meltdowns, or, as Žižek points out, something as basic as who gets the water from a river that flows through multiple countries. These problems laugh at borders. They can only be solved together. So we're just stuck in this loop, lurching from one crisis to the next, always feeling like the big one, the apocalypse, is just around the corner. But the revelation never comes. We're living in the end times, but the end never actually arrives. So, all right, how in the world do we start to make sense of this? This is where Žižek brings in his special tool. It's a concept he borrows from the psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan, and he says, this is the secret operator, the secret ingredient that makes our topsy-turvy world go round. It's called surplus enjoyment. This is it. This is our master key. Now, it sounds a little academic, right? The perverted pleasure gained from renunciation itself. But I guarantee you felt this. Imagine you're on a really strict diet. The official goal, the rational reason you're doing it, is to get healthy, to lose weight. That's the pleasure you're aiming for down the line. But haven't you ever felt that little thrill, that little jolt of satisfaction from the act of just saying no to a slice of cake? That little feeling of smugness, of virtuous suffering? That feeling, that's surplus enjoyment. It's the extra kick you get not from getting the thing you want, but from the struggle, from the rules, from the act of giving it up. It's the weird gain we find in loss. Or think about the classic workaholic. They stay at the office till all hours. The official story they tell themselves and everyone else is, I'm working for that big promotion, for that bonus. But so often, the real, unspoken driver is the enjoyment of the grind itself, the pride they take in their own exhaustion, the feeling of being totally indispensable. The suffering becomes its own reward. This is that twisted but totally fundamental logic that we're going to be exploring.
And if that still feels a bit slippery, there's a fantastic parallel in economics that makes it super clear. You've probably heard of Karl Marx and his idea of surplus value. So the idea is pretty simple. Let's say a worker gets paid for 8 hours of work, but in those 8 hours, they actually produce enough stuff to be worth, say, 10 hours of labor. The capitalist sells the product and pockets the value of those extra 2 hours. That difference, that unpaid labor, that's surplus value. It's the extra bit the system skims off the top. Well, Lacan and Žižek argue that our desires work in almost the exact same way. There's the official value, the pleasure you get from actually achieving your goal, like eating the delicious meal or getting the promotion. But the whole system of your desire, with all its rules and roadblocks and daydreams and waiting, that whole process generates its own extra surplus pleasure. It's the enjoyment that's skimmed off the top, not from getting to the destination, but from the journey itself. So here's the basic recipe. It's a simple two-step logic that powers this whole thing. Step 1, you renounce pleasure. You put an obstacle in your own way. You say no to the dessert. You follow some frustrating bureaucratic rule to the letter. You put off getting what you want. And on the surface, this feels like a loss. But then step 2 kicks in, and this is where the magic happens. A weird little switch gets flipped in your brain. The very act of renouncing, of following that rule, of suffering just a little bit, that act itself becomes a source of pleasure. The sacrifice creates its own weird kind of satisfaction. You don't just feel good in spite of the sacrifice, you feel good because of it. And this feedback loop, where you turn a loss into a gain, that's the engine of surplus enjoyment. It's what keeps us all running on that hamster wheel, enjoying the feeling of running almost more than any cheese we might get at the end. Okay, so now that we have this key, let's start using it. Let's apply this idea to the world of politics. Because once you see this dynamic, that people can actually get pleasure from breaking rules, from the process of a political struggle, even from their own sense of suffering or grievance, you realize that surplus enjoyment is a really potent and, frankly, dangerous political fuel. It helps explain all that passion and energy we see in politics that seems to completely defy any kind of rational self-interest.
Now, this quote here is just pure genius. It's from a performance artist who ran for president in Croatia. And it exposes something deep and really uncomfortable about politics. His main platform was corruption for everybody. Now, of course, it was a joke. It was a piece of political art. But it tapped into a very real feeling. People are often incredibly cynical about politics. They have this feeling that the whole system is rigged, that all politicians are corrupt. So what did this guy do? He didn't try to deny it. No, he leaned into it. He tapped into that cynical enjoyment we sometimes get from seeing the rules get broken. He basically said, you're right, the system is totally corrupt. But why should only the elites get to have all the fun breaking the rules? I will make that transgression democratic. He was promising to share a forbidding pleasure, to let everyone in on the enjoyment of breaking the law. And in doing that, he just revealed the surplus enjoyment that was already there, bubbling away right under the surface of public life. It shows you how you can rally people not by promising them a better, more honest future, but by promising them a piece of the forbidden pie. And that example really gets to the core of it, for both politics and for capitalism. The real kick, the real enjoyment, isn't just about achieving the goal. It's not just about winning the election or being corrupt. It's about the game. It's about the process itself. The psychoanalyst Lacan pointed this out ages ago. Modern capitalism might have started with the very rational goal of, making a profit, but it very quickly turned into something else. It turned into the sheer, abstract pleasure of accumulating. The endless activity becomes its own reward. A true capitalist often enjoys the process, watching the charts go up, the thrill of the deal, the constant motion of the market, way more than they enjoy the fancy cars or houses the money can buy. The process is the prize. The endless accumulation is its own kind of surplus enjoyment, and the system just runs on that strange fuel.
Now, Žižek takes this logic a step further, and he uses it to analyze the energy behind certain political movements. He argues that if you want to understand their passionate following, you can't just look at their official policies or their economic complaints. You have to look at the enjoyment that's on display. He points to what he calls a carnivalesque atmosphere at their events. And what's a carnival, right? It's a special time when, for a little while, all the normal rules are suspended. Hierarchies get turned upside down, and things that are normally forbidden are openly celebrated. Well, in Žižek's analysis, certain political rallies can function in a very similar way. There's a visible shared pleasure in shattering taboos, in saying the things you're not supposed to say, in breaking all the social norms of politeness. And this transgressive enjoyment, he argues, is an incredibly powerful political force. It binds a group together in a way that goes far beyond any rational political program. It's a kind of collective surplus enjoyment.
Okay, let's really put this key to work now and use it to unlock capitalism. On the surface, the system presents itself as the peak of rationality. It's an efficient machine for making things and allocating resources and maximizing profit. But Žižek argues that there's a much stranger, much more irrational engine of surplus enjoyment running just underneath it all. And it's driving the whole thing to some bizarre and contradictory places. Just take a look at this number. The UN's World Food Program once estimated that just 2% of a single person's wealth could, in theory, solve world hunger for an entire year. Now, whether that number is perfectly accurate down to the dollar isn't really the point. The point is what it represents. Just think about the sheer irrationality of a system like that. We have a global economy that is so fantastically productive that it can generate this kind of obscene surplus for one individual, and yet it cannot solve the most basic, fundamental problem of human survival for millions of people. This is not a rational system for meeting human needs. And for Žižek, this points to a kind of modern neo-feudalism. It's a system where the logic isn't about the general well-being of people at all. It's about an endless, obscene, and totally irrational accumulation for its own sake. The accumulation itself has become the goal. It's a systemic surplus enjoyment that's completely disconnected from any rational human purpose. So how does capitalism get away with this? How does it manage to maintain these crazy, irrational outcomes while it sells itself as the system of freedom and rationality? Well, it performs a kind of magic trick. In the old world, the pre-modern world, domination was pretty obvious and personal. You had a lord who owned a serf, a king who ruled a subject. It was right there in your face. Then capitalism comes along and says, everybody's free. You're not owned by anyone. You're free to sell your labor to whoever you want. But here's the trick. It doesn't actually get rid of domination. It just hides it. It performs this brilliant sleight of hand. It takes the power relationship away from being between people, and it hides it inside of things, the commodities that we buy and sell on the market. We feel like we're free individuals making free choices, but we are still ruled by the cold, impersonal logic of the market, by the constant need to sell our labor just to survive, by the relentless pressure of competition. The domination is still there. It's just not personal anymore. It's systemic.
So now let's bring this all home. Let's turn this analysis inward. Because this isn't just about these big abstract systems out there, like politics or the economy. The most crucial part of this whole analysis, the part that really stings, is understanding how those systems get inside our own heads, how they colonize our minds and shape our most intimate feelings, our desires, our anxieties, and our pleasures. And this is the work of what we call ideology, and it operates through what psychoanalysis calls the superego. And this brings us to the most fundamental and maybe the most uncomfortable question that Žižek forces us to ask ourselves. Why do we put up with all of this? Why do we actively participate in systems that so often seem to work against our own best interests? Now, the simple answer is, well, we don't have a choice. But Žižek's more unsettling answer is that modern power isn't just about force. It's not just about coercion. It's also about seduction. The system doesn't just oppress us, it kind of bribes us. It gives us a little bit of this perverse pleasure, this surplus enjoyment, in the very rules that box us in. We somehow learn to find a little kick in the performance of our own subordination. So, how does that work? How does ideology trick us into enjoying our own lack of freedom? Well, it works through this really twisted command that comes from our culture, from our modern superego. And that command is, enjoy. But here's the trap. It's a command you can never actually obey. And that's the whole point. You're told, enjoy yourself, be authentic, live your best life. But at the same time, you're hit with all these images of perfection that you can never possibly live up to. You're told to save the planet, but you're stuck in a system that makes having a huge carbon footprint almost impossible to avoid. So you're just made to feel personally guilty for a huge systemic problem. You're told to constantly reinvent yourself, be flexible, start a side hustle, but this endless pressure is just completely exhausting. And this huge gap between the impossible command to enjoy and our failure to ever really get there, it just creates this constant state of anxiety and guilt. And perversely, we can get a kind of sick pleasure out of that guilt, a weird satisfaction in feeling like we're not good enough. And this last point is the most mind-bending of all. Sometimes the most radical, transgressive thing you can do is follow a rule too closely. Imagine a factory worker who, instead of taking the usual shortcuts to get the job done, decides to follow every single safety and procedural rule exactly as it's written. What would happen? The entire factory would grind to a halt. By obeying the rule perfectly, they expose the real unspoken rule, which is, you have to break the rules a little bit just to make the system work. It exposes the total hypocrisy of the whole setup. So, if we're caught in this crazy web of commands and guilt and perverse enjoyment, if even our attempts to resist are often just part of the game, is there any way out? Is there an escape hatch? Can we ever truly break free? This brings us to the most difficult, the most controversial, and the most provocative part of Žižek's entire argument. His proposal for a potential and extremely radical way out.
The term for it is subjective destitution. And I know, it sounds like some heavy academic jargon, but let's just pull it apart. Subjective refers to you, your sense of self, who you think you are. Destitution means absolute poverty, having nothing left. So subjective destitution is the act of making yourself totally destitute. It's like performing a factory reset on your own identity. Imagine hitting rock bottom so hard that you fall right through the floor. It's about willingly letting go of everything that gives you a place in society, your job, your social status, your reputation, your place in the family. It's about embracing the position of being a total outcast, a piece of social garbage, what Žižek calls something excremental. This isn't just about dropping out and living in the woods. It's a much more fundamental, much more violent break from the entire symbolic game that we use to recognize ourselves and each other. Now, this is an incredibly abstract idea, so let's look at some figures from myth and from history who seem to embody this terrifying process. First, you've got Oedipus. We all know the first part of his story, the tragic king. But the story continues. In the final play about him, he's an old, blind, homeless beggar being led around by his daughter. He has lost literally everything, his kingdom, his sight, his honor. He is pure destitution. But in that absolute nothingness, he finds this new, sacred, and frankly terrifying power. He's no longer subject to the laws of the city. He's something else. Then think about Christ on the cross. In that moment when he cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" In that moment, he is utterly abandoned by his people, by the law, and now even by God himself. He is reduced to nothing but a tortured victim. And Žižek argues that it is only from that absolute zero point of destitution that something new, the Christian community, could be founded. And finally, a modern example. That famous photograph of Che Guevara's body after he was captured and executed. He's defeated. His revolution has failed. He's been reduced to a corpse, an object put on display. And yet that very image of total defeat, of total destitution, becomes this immortal symbol of revolution that inspired countless others. In every case, a new world or a new kind of power only seems to emerge after the subject passes through this zero point of complete annihilating loss.
And so this is where Žižek leaves us, with his final, deeply unsettling provocation. His whole analysis seems to suggest that all our usual ways of trying to fix the world, protesting, voting for reforms, trying to make capitalism more ethical, that all of it is ultimately doomed to fail. And why? Because all of those things are still playing by the rules of the game, and the game itself runs on this twisted logic of surplus enjoyment. Our very efforts to make things better can end up generating their own perverse pleasure that just keeps the old system running. So he claims that for a truly new beginning, for a real break from this topsy-turvy world, it requires this radical, terrifying act of subjective destitution. It means breaking ourselves free from the game entirely. Which leaves us with a really profound and deeply personal question. If the world really is broken, are we willing to do more than just try and patch it up? To create a truly different world, are we willing to first break ourselves?